Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Reimagine v13. Really excited to be talking about all things Parachains, interoperability, and the Polkadot ecosystem at large. I'm your host, Roshan Mirajkar from the MouseBelt team, and today our panel will be discussing DeFi as well as decentralized communities and the growth of the Polkadot ecosystem. Before we get started, I want to welcome in our guests and give them a chance to introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, James. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here. My name's James Bailey. I'm the head of business development at OnFinality and Subquery. I'll give a quick intro what we do. So two kind of projects. OnFinality is one of the biggest infrastructure providers across Polkadot. We work with teams and different parachains like Moonbeam to provide infrastructure support. If you're accessing Polkadot through a wallet, it's very likely that your request will go through our nodes on their way to the Moonbeam network. On the other hand, Subquery is all about data indexing. So if you're building an application, you need to access data in a more efficient way. Data in a blockchain is really in a really terrible format in order to query it. Like it's pretty much the worst possible design you could come up with if you wanted to access and retrieve and query data efficiently and fast. So Subquery is like a middle layer there that allows you to access that data, pre-process it, and retrieve it in a format that makes building applications so much easier. So yeah, looking forward to talking today, Roshan.
For sure, and I'll turn it over to Nate.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm Nate Hamilton. I lead ecosystem for Moonbeam. And so generally, my day-to-day looks like just dealing with teams, trying to get people excited to come build with us. And so Moonbeam, at a high level, provide an Ethereum compatibility platform. And that's really our special sauce is the EVM capabilities that we've built into a parachain. And so we've been building Moonbeam for about 2 years, and Moonriver. I don't want to undersell Moonriver, the Kusama ecosystem, but yeah. So I just help kind of curate the two ecosystems, make connections, and get people excited to come build on either of those platforms.
Yeah, excited to have you both here. I think it's a great pairing, and excited to get into some of these topics. But I think we should start with talking about why did you all choose the Polkadot architecture ecosystem to build your projects on, and maybe what are some of the problems that you saw opportunities with? We'll start with you, James.
Yeah, so like many teams in the space, kind of the first few people in the table were developers, and one thing about Polkadot and Substrate, which is a coding language that Polkadot is built on, it's a very appealing proposition for developers. We like the fact that it's not as opinionated as the Ethereum virtual machine. And obviously Gavin Wood, who co-founded Ethereum and has moved over to kind of lead Polkadot, as a bit of a celebrity among developers, among the blockchain developers. So for us, there was an aspect of us kind of nerding out about the technology itself. But after being in this ecosystem for some time, or being in blockchain for some time, you start seeing the problems of these kind of isolated communities, these little islands that form around their own layer one. And when you think for the future and how we must kind of build blockchain if we want it to get picked up by retail adoption, one of those things is interoperability, is being able to work together, being able to talk to each other. And Polkadot, from very early on, Polkadot started really strongly around, okay, we believe this is a way that chains will be interoperable in the future. And we're building this network from day one to enable that future. So rather than kind of trying to squeeze in at the end, Polkadot was built from the outset with that. And that for us was very attractive because we thought 2 years ago that there would be a proliferation of parachains, and I think that's come true. There is a huge number of parachains launching each and every week from here on out. So it's kind of our dreams have been realized.
Yeah, for sure. And move to you, Nate, if you want to break down, you're sort of working on both sides, kind of helping with the EVM compatibility, but still supporting Polkadot ecosystem. So what was your thought process on, why you chose to build this in the Polkadot ecosystem?
Yeah, in like late 2019, we as a company, PeerStake, were thinking about kind of what else we wanted to do. We have kind of a background in infrastructure, and so we've done a lot of nodes, validators, things along those lines. And I think we were thinking about like where the future was going. In late 2019, we were like, it's going to be a multi-chain future. We were pretty committed to that early on, and so when you start thinking about that, you're pretty quickly driven to two ecosystems. One is Cosmos, one is Polkadot. Just based on kind of their core focus, it's really interoperability and it's multiple chains being able to talk to one another. Now there are other chains now that do similar aspects of that, but I think at the time and even now, I think like the two predominant ones were and still are Cosmos and Polkadot. And so we actually started by running validators and kind of poking around and seeing like what else we could do. And to James's point, I think we saw very early on that developer traction in Polkadot was just like so organic, and we were like, when there's like no tokens, there's no real money to be made, there's like this whole like swath of people that are building, you're like, wow, there's some like real force here behind this, and there's true belief. And to us, that was really, really impactful in terms of going and getting an ecosystem of people who want to be there because they want to be there, not because they're getting paid. That's huge. And so that's why we really kind of early on, there are obviously technical things, right? We believed in substrate in terms of the shared security model, all of those kinds of things. We preferred Rust over Go, and so there were technical things. But from my perspective, on just kind of the ecosystem side, the thing that really drew us in was kind of the developer traction and kind of the love for the organic love for Polkadot. And so that's really where we kind of came in, and then Moonbeam followed on, where I think we were, none of us were necessarily like crypto OGs in any way, shape, or form. A lot of us have worked together in the past, more Web2 focused. And so, when we came over, we were just kind of pragmatists in terms of we believed in the Polkadot architecture of, shared security, build your own blockchain, and all of those great things. But we were pragmatic in the approach of, well, if we're going to try and get developers to come build on top of us, what do folks in the ecosystem understand? And it was, well, they understand EVM, they understand building on Ethereum. And so how do we take that and all of the developers that have been building there for, at the time, 4, 5, 6 years, and provide them, that same kind of experience. And so that's where we focused on the EVM. And if you look at our messaging, especially even early on, it was very, very focused and clear of we are just going to provide the best place for Ethereum compatible, applications to be built. Now it's added on in terms of we're really leaning into being a great place for building natively interoperable projects and things along those lines. But really from the start, it was just kind of a pragmatic approach of the developers in the space know working with the EVM. Let's build something that feels like the EVM, and it has that whole tech stack around it as well.
Yeah, well, I really like that mentality, actually, kind of like not stealing people from another ecosystem, but like almost introducing them to something else. And who's to say you can't be a developer on Polkadot and Ethereum at the same time, right?
Yeah, I think that I think that we early on kind of saw that. I can imagine the BD team at Parity out, trying to talk to teams and get teams excited, especially ones that might have roots in the Ethereum space, kind of going and saying, hey, you've got this great application, you should come build it on Polkadot. It's more scalable, it does more things. But building, a parachain, it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. It's gotten a lot easier since I think both of our teams started a while ago, but it's still like it's a big undertaking, and so being able to kind of go to market with, well, you can build a parachain, and if that doesn't work, well, Moonbeam and I know the team at A-Star, we were kind of the two that were like, well, there's developer platforms where you can kind of come in and get comfortable, and maybe long term you decide to build a parachain, but it kind of was like, let's give developers an easy access road into Polkadot, because I think we had a lot of the true believers. And I think we needed to kind of help foster more and more folks to kind of come into this ecosystem and long term, hopefully, we'll just continue to kind of grow the Polkadot pie.
Yeah, totally. And let's sort of go deeper on how this kind of affects, I guess, the users and, kind of looking into the future a bit. So let's kind of talk about, how does this, all the things you guys are talking about, how does it trickle down into the changes in the DeFi application or like cross-chain DeFi application, the Polkadot ecosystem for new users? Maybe if you guys want to talk about either experiences or even new feature sets, maybe of doing DeFi this way. James, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So where we are in Polkadot, it's still very early days in Polkadot, and you have these kind of communities, Moonbeam especially, where you have quite a lot of activity in the application space, because Moonbeam has provided that really warm and loving environment where you can build these applications and get them started. But across the rest of Polkadot, there's a lot of early stage development. So we haven't yet kind of seen the proliferation of DeFi apps that we're expecting to see, because things like cross-chain messages, which is like a fundamental piece of the puzzle, allows one parachain to talk to another and communicate, or allows you to exchange an asset from one chain to another, or transfer the asset. This cross-chain messaging format has only just been introduced in the past month, so very early days for Polkadot. But we are starting to see the beginnings of what's to come, right? So this interoperability is a key lens to look at everything through. So what if you could do all the DeFi stuff that you do elsewhere, but you can do it in a way that is a lot more portable? The assets you take, portable. You can benefit from optimizations like on-chain decentralized exchanges and other improvements that just make life a lot easier. So, it's hard to say right now. We're seeing a lot of stuff happening, but the future's looking pretty bright.
Yeah, I'll let Nate jump in here to talk more about, what are some of the changes you see? Like, do you think it's more on the technical level, like in the app, when users are actually using these DeFi applications, do you think it'll just be because the UX is cleaner, or do you think like people will be more aware that they're not using a blockchain, if that makes sense, through Polkadot because they're using Parachain?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's probably a lot of answers to that question, but at least in my view, the thing that's going to get more mainstream adoption is going to be front end and wallet support. So I know that there are some really good teams building in the ecosystem that are focused on providing like better wallets that can utilize, whether it's the crowd loan functionality in Polkadot, or things along those lines, where Polkadot.js is extremely powerful and it's really, really good at I'd say very like complex things, but from a user perspective, it is really hard to work with. And so if we're talking about like mainstream adoption, I think that absolutely it's got to come down to UI, UX, and that includes wallet support, and how do you kind of match those two in a way that users don't necessarily have to know what blockchain they're on, or whether it's even a blockchain. For us, and as James had mentioned, XCM just went live 3 weeks ago on Polkadot, and so all of the what I'd call like more high power XCM use cases have yet to necessarily come into production. And so we're starting those discussions right now with all of the Parachain teams about like what can we drive that can only be driven on Polkadot. And so I think you'll see some of that come out pretty soon. I mean, some of the interesting like updates from like our side is we've got this XC20 precompile where when an asset gets moved on to Moonbeam, take a Akala's token, when that comes on to Moonbeam, it gets wrapped and it just looks like an ERC20 token to DeFi applications, things like that on Moonbeam specifically, because that's how all of the DeFi and/or Solidity-based code interact with it. It's an ERC20, but when it moves outward off of Moonbeam, it gets wrapped into this XC20 that when it's on a substrate-based chain, it looks and feels like a substrate-based asset and not an ERC20. So there are some cool things like that we've been working on, but again, it is like still I feel like we've been saying it's super early days for Polkadot for a while, but like now that all the features are there, I think it is like truly very early days, and I think you'll start to see some really cool applications start to pop up over the next 3 months.
But you make a good point, Stan, around like for us to really take blockchain to the masses, we have to make it look like it's not actually on a blockchain, let alone not being able to figure out what blockchain it was on. It's got to go further than that. It's got to be looking like something that we use every day. And I kind of use the parents test. If you can get your parents to interact with it and use it on a daily basis, I think we've kind of achieved our goals. I don't know how good your parents are with technology, but mine are a little bit old-fashioned. But we're just starting to see that come through, and this is something we do a lot at Subcareers. We kind of focus on building that tool that allows developers to build much better user interfaces. And one of the examples of how we work together to do these things is like this cross-chain messaging example. It keeps coming up because it's very critical for Polkadot. It is a kind of a cornerstone of what you're trying to do here. And we're sponsoring a hackathon event with Moonbeam, with Akala and with HydroDX, of 4 teams co-sponsoring a bounty in a North American hackathon to build a user, a kind of explorer for cross-chain messages, a really good user interface, because we all recognize the importance of really easy to understand, easy to visualize user experiences. Not everyone can kind of go through and read out the extrinsics on the chain. You have to be able to see that flow of value, of transfer of assets, and map that around the ecosystem before it gets too complicated. I guess that speaks as well to like one of the differences of Polkadot, I think, from other networks is how much the teams here work together. There is a huge amount of collaboration, and I'm sure Nate's done a lot in that space, and it's changed a lot over time, especially from the early days where it's just a few teams hacking around in here. But most teams are talking to each other. There's some really active Discord chats where developers are just constantly trying to find solutions together. And there's less of this kind of like zero sum, we're here to win above all else. It's more of this work together to make this better, because we all kind of realize that the sum of the parts is greater. The end result is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and it's perfect because that's exactly what I kind of wanted to jump into next. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on, kind of explaining the parachain concept a bit, but also like one of my specific questions is, from your perspective, do you guys think parachains currently are being utilized for more specialization, or do you think it's like commercialization? Like, should more parachains be collaborative, or is there like a benefit to kind of being better than one parachain over another per se? Maybe Nate, I'll start with you.
It sometimes can be hard to like, if you're building something, you want it to be the best, and so it can sometimes be hard to realize that like the sum of the parts is generally greater if you can kind of work together versus kind of trying to silo and have everything under one umbrella. And so yeah, we absolutely I mean, the amount of like code that gets shared between teams and things along those lines where we're all working together. We obviously have different go-to-market strategies. We definitely have different focuses and different goals and things along those lines. And I do think it is kind of hard, especially early on with the first 5, 10, 15 parachains. It is hard not to. I mean, when you're trying to do these crowd loans to get people to come in, you want your slot, you want your marketing, you want all of the things that I think are important, but at the same time, kind of you do have to realize that like over time, like we are just one big ecosystem, and if we can really hone in on the specialization of each of our blockchains, and we can utilize XCM for the use cases that can't be kind of done today on one chain or across chains that don't have something like XCM in place, I think we're better off in the long run.
And how about the incentive? Like, could you kind of explain what's the change in incentive for like different parachains to work together versus something like Ethereum, EVM, where maybe that sort of model doesn't exist, where you have to be like super competitive maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of like incentives to collaborate is at the end of the day, like if you can lean into the specialization of a blockchain, I think that if you can do one thing and do it really, really well, that kind of puts you to a place where whether it's a, I don't know, whether it's a lending and borrowing team or whether it's derivatives or something along those lines, that if you can do something really, really well and you can go look at other teams that may do something like decentralized storage or something where you can kind of pick and choose between these different parachains to say like, I need this from here, I need this from here, and you can build like a truly decentralized application across the Polkadot ecosystem. I think that is like ultimately like the end goal, because then you can really focus on doing something very specific and doing it really, really well. So I guess that's just my take though.
And maybe to step back a few steps and maybe explain for those that don't know what parachains mean or are kind of confused by this term that we're explaining. So a common blockchain is its own set, validators, and they're all kind of working together to run this own independent blockchain, which records the state of an ecosystem. Now, the idea with Polkadot was like, all these blockchains are currently running. There's quite a few at the time, but they're not really talking to each other. And that's not really good. You can't really create a nation when all the states are fighting and refuse to talk. It doesn't work. So the idea of Polkadot was, okay, the core Polkadot chain, we're going to minimize what's on it. Okay, so throw away anything that's unnecessary. Let's just focus on a key few things. So security. We want to make sure that we have enough validators from Polkadot so that Polkadot never is secure and never stops. And each of these parachains that connect to it can kind of take advantage of that. Common heartbeat or block time. So every 6 seconds, a new block's on Polkadot. And that's a common heartbeat that every parachain kind of adheres to. And then a common language. So substrate, but also a lot of these frameworks and standards that all the parachains that connect to Polkadot can understand and communicate with. So after focusing on just the minimal stuff, there's a little bit more, but just the minimal stuff, and also governance. I think that's also worth mentioning is the governance of being able to change that chain, because we've realized that creating this blockchain and not thinking about how you change it is a really bad idea, because software has to change with the times, has to be improved, and if you kind of make sure that if you kind of require 51% of miners or validators to agree on a change, it's quite difficult. Which is what we see with other chains, other layer ones. So with these 4 main approaches, security, that block time, common languages, and the governance, you then built this kind of docking station to which all these other parachains can connect to, and they can all secure their slot, and they can connect to that reload chain, and they all kind of run off that same approach, and they benefit from those 4 common kind of concepts. But they can all talk to each other. So that's the whole parachain ethos. It's creating this foundation where all these other bespoke blockchains, each layer 1, each of these parachains is pretty much your own blockchain for all intents and purposes, but they can still interoperate and talk together. You touched on something which is, the incentives to collaborate, and I like to think of this going back to that nation of states, right? Like, if you want to build a thriving state that has amazing economic model and is growing because everyone's coming to it, closing your borders and preventing anyone from coming in or leaving is probably not the best way to do it. So there is a huge incentive to collaborate, to make it easy as possible for people to migrate across these chains, to try it out, to enter and see what's happening, and then kind of maybe move on or stay, because it's a good place to be. So ensuring that your borders are open, that you can collaborate effectively and easily with other chains, that's a huge incentive for growing an ecosystem. And, that's, I think, Nate and I do that for our kind of a day-to-day job, is making sure that we can, that we make it easy for other ecosystem players to come in and build amazing things using our technologies.
For sure. Thanks for that explanation. And I think, what I learned from you guys, the way you guys are explaining it, it's like, I think it's like the similar type of business logic that everyone is used to, in the real world per se. So very cool. I want to dive a little deeper into kind of like, what is your guys' approach in building with the community versus like for the community? Like, where do you guys find that balance with what feature set you're trying to build next. I'll go to you, Nate, first.
Sure. I think that like being a platform, we try and not necessarily build anything that's not platform related. And so that's really just comes to like the core EVM, stack is really where our focus is, and making sure that compatibility across the board is there for the builders. And so, whether, keeping an eye on new EIPs that kind of could pop up that might get implemented, making sure that, we can support those. The interesting thing about the EVM is that a lot of like the tooling and all of the infrastructure around it has been built, right? And that was kind of one of the impetuses for us doing, Moonbeam as the EVM, was there was all of these tools that people knew how to work with already. So whether it was, Open Zeppelin or Truffle Remix, Hard Hat, Waffle, like all of these things are like key for developers, to be able to utilize, to work with. And so we kind of, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We kind of had it there. We just had to get Polkadot on it and kind of create that. So that's where we stand when it comes to like, building infra.
It's like the common like product management challenge. Anytime you build a software company that does B2B sales, there's always the same challenge, which is how do you avoid becoming a project company? And the difference in a product and a project is a project you're building stuff for other people, kind of custom for them. A product, you're building something that benefits everyone. And you're going to piss off some people sometimes. It's inevitable. Some people are going to want something and demand it, and you're going to have to say, no, it's not worth our time to do. So that's something that I think both Moonbeam and Subcore and OnFinality have had to do. Be very careful around that, and there's a lot of product management skills there. I think people underestimate also the amount of work that we put into not technology, like things outside of that. So the documentation, the developer experience, the onboarding guides, the tutorials, the kind of collaboration, and trying to encourage and foster as much of that as possible. And I'm kind of curious to hear from you, Nate, around how do you think things have changed in terms of how if going back 2 years when you're trying to invite these projects to come onto Moonbeam, what's changed about your approach from then to now, where you're now kind of a big name and you have that ecosystem that's almost self-sufficient and growing organically now?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly less of an uphill battle. I mean, early days, it would be like, we're creating this thing called Moonbeam, and people were like, what the hell is Moonbeam? And you'd have to kind of go through this. Well, there's Polkadot. And they're like, like Polkadot, Gavin, like, is that shipping? And then you'd have to be like, okay, well, it's coming. And so you'd have much more of an uphill battle to kind of convince people that it was, going to be an interesting ecosystem, versus now I think we're continuing to see that a lot of teams are speaking to us about, hey, look, I want to build like a natively interoperable protocol that has access to Polkadot, has access to Ethereum, maybe AVAX or Polygon. And so we see Moonbeam as a place that's good for building that, because when we that's kind of built in the DNA of Polkadot, which gets pushed to Moonbeam in terms of like interoperability is something we've always just kind of focused on. And so, I think that now that everyone is going multi-chain, I think for the most part, we've got a really strong, compelling story because of the Polkadot ecosystem and, the values that Polkadot really, I think, instilled in us in terms of like interoperability is key to start with. You can build everything after that, but adding on interoperability after the fact, that's a lot harder.
For sure. And I think, you guys both of you are mainly focused on like the infrastructure side of things. So I kind of want to ask you guys, in your perspective, is there like a clear like demographic winner in just the Polkadot ecosystem? Like, could this benefit enterprises and companies more, something like getting more exposure into DeFi? Or do you think ultimately we're seeing the rise of it benefiting like retail investors?
That's the whole point of Parachains, right? Is that you have your own kingdom, you can do whatever you want in that. With like building on Ethereum, it's kind of like you have the Ethereum virtual machine, which gives you some flexibility and freedom. It's kind of like having the freedom to customize your apartment however you want. But with building your own parachain, it's the flexibility of building the apartment building. You can build a huge estate or manor. You can build a massive kind of high-rise apartment. You have the freedom, right? So it does lend itself a bit more to like, and it's a very early stage network, right? And you get a lot of networks that have gone straight for these big banks and government organizations and kind of talked a big game about privacy and security but you can do whatever you want on Polkadot, and I think people don't quite realize what people can do, and it's one of our tasks, both Moonbeam and OnFinality and sub-careers, that we have to kind of show off what is possible. And I think that is one of the shortcomings of Polkadot, is we're too focused building right now. We're going to spend more time kind of talking about what we're building and why it's so easy to do that here.
For sure. And like Nate, maybe if you want to go into like how much of the network structure, the architecture is the selling point, because like there's been a lot of reports, Polkadot is like the most green blockchain proof of stake network. So yeah, how much of like the actual technology, the architecture, things that people are still understanding, what you guys are working on, maybe turns into like business opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Polkadot narrative is certainly one that continues to like resonate with people. I mean, sometimes you'll meet folks that are, whether they're ETH maxis or whether they just say like, yeah, I don't believe in the Polkadot kind of like setup or whatever. Like, yeah, people have opinions, but I think ultimately the majority of folks and builders we talk to are they're believers in Polkadot long term. I think they've probably somebody kind of said a couple of weeks ago, they were like, I feel like Polkadot's just been like underplayed for like the past year, and now that things are live, you're going to start to see more come out. And to echo kind of what James had said about your question about like who does it most impact, I do think that you're going to start to see bigger enterprises start to probably look at Parachains, because you can build it from scratch, from the ground up. You can control every aspect of it. You can get the shared security of Polkadot, but it can be your own blockchain. So you can be a public blockchain that's almost permissioned, which is, I think, something that a lot of these, like early days, like R3 and Corda and IBM, they were, private ledger, all that kind of vernacular, like that didn't make sense. But a public blockchain that has the ability to be permissioned in some ways, I think that's a pretty compelling story. So I think you'll see more more interesting use cases start to pop up for Polkadot over the coming year.
For sure. And James, I don't know if you have anything to add before I ask my last question to you guys and we wrap up the panel.
No, I think Nate covered it pretty well.
Sure. To kind of end things off, I think we've covered a variety of topics. Maybe if you guys want to give, your 1 to 3 pieces of advice for new builders on Polkadot. And James, you can go first. I always ask the same question, but I never quite think of the answer. I think most importantly, it's talk to people. There is a lot of very friendly people in this ecosystem. We're all incentivized not to see our own kingdoms grow, but to see the ecosystem grow. We all are believers that collaboration and communication and all those things kind of benefit us all more than not doing them. So just talk to different teams. The first step, if you're planning to build in this ecosystem, is talk around the place, ask for introductions, you'll get it. You can kind of access anyone here. The second one is do design for collaboration from the start. If you're in Polkadot and you're trying to build your walled garden, it's probably not the best place. Go use something else. You can still do it in Polkadot, of course, but you can still use Substrate. But I think building in Polkadot is better if you build for collaboration from the outset. I think that's all that comes to mind at the moment. Yeah, no, love it.
Yeah, I would say that get similar to what James said, get active in the ecosystem. I mean, I just think that like teams like like Moonbeam and Subquery have been been in this ecosystem for 2+, 3+ years, 4+ years in some cases, that like the wealth of knowledge I think that teams have started to amass, the amount of open source code that's been created, like, you know, myself and Derek, our CEO, like we continue to meet with teams. I tell the BD team at Parity, as well as like, you know, the builders team, like I'm always open to talking to new parachains. Like any team that's building a parachain, like we're happy to talk to, we're happy to give feedback, we're happy to, you know, continue to make connections in the ecosystem, because I think ultimately what will set us apart is the collaboration aspect of what Polkadot can drive. And so we really need to lean into that. And we need to be supportive of new teams building in here. And so, you know, get active, reach out, get help, you know, whatever you can do, because I think every team in this ecosystem is willing to help new teams that are building.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you both for your time here. I really enjoyed the conversation and all the great comparisons you had. And for the rest of you who are still tuning in, our audience, stay tuned. We still have more interviews at Reimagine v13. Thank you.